New to CuriosityStream, explore the world of caves miles underground
Yours is the first light ever to illuminate this cavern.
with wonders never before seen.
Amazing.
Watch the Curiosity original Underworld. And did you know body temperature changes based on your emotions? See how our feelings impact us in ways we never imagined in the science of emotions. Watch now on CuriosityStream. Annual plans are just $20. That's $1.67 a month. Visit CuriosityStream.com.
Writer Kate Michaels has a new project and an enigmatic new collaborator.
There's been murders in my neighborhood.
Sometimes there's a thin line between fact and fiction.
Who is it? FBI.
Please help. Ma'am, can you give me your address?
Kate Mara and Adam Scott in Ghostwriter, a new one-episode feature-length podcast movie experience from C13 Features.
Ghostwriter is available now on the Odyssey app and wherever you find your podcasts.
This is the John Whitmer Show on 98.7 and 1330 KNSS.
Maybe it's much too early in the game. But I thought I'd ask you just the same. What are you doing New Year's Eve?
Welcome back to the John Whitmer Show on 98.7 and 1330 KNSS, Wichita's #1 talk. You can also listen to us by downloading the Odyssey app or by telling your smart speaker to play KNSS Radio. And make sure you like and share the John Whitmer Show on Facebook. And, of course, follow me on Twitter at John R. Whitmer. That's the best way to stay informed on all the latest show updates. A little What Are You Doing New Year's Eve? I know it was last night, but still, by Straight No Chaser. As we're gearing up to start off our 2022, we're still looking back at the final economic numbers for 2021. And, while likely to see the annual growth rate at about 5.5%, the unemployment rate fell to nearly 4%. And while that's all very good, there were still problems with inflation. We ended the year with inflation at about 7.5% as measured by the Consumer Price Index. That inflation rate is the worst we've seen since 1981. So what will 2022 bring? Well, we're going to ask the experts. Joining us now to help answer that question is Dr. Michael Busler. He is a public policy analyst, economics expert, and a professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. He's a featured columnist at Newsmax, The Hill, The Western Journal, and townhall.com. Dr. Busler, thank you for joining us this evening, and Happy New Year, my friend.
Well, thank you. Happy New Year to you, too, and it's always my pleasure to be here.
So, Professor, let me kind of ask you this. Economic growth in 2021 was higher than at any time since 1984. But which sounds great. I mean, on paper, sort of like, unfortunately, my Kansas Jayhawk basketball team. They look great on paper, and that's something always seems to happen. But most of the growth was fueled by huge increases in government spending and COVID-related payments to individuals. So those numbers aren't real, or are they? Am I wrong?
Well, I think you're right. So last year, and we don't have all the numbers exactly in yet, but the numbers that you mentioned are likely to be what's happened. So we did have very good growth. The unemployment is at a full employment level, which is very good. The bugaboo is inflation. And inflation, we haven't gotten the final number yet, but as you mentioned, it'll probably be about 7.5% for the year. So what does that mean going forward? Well, I expect to have some pretty good growth for the year, mostly in the first half of this year, and maybe slowing down a little bit at the end of the year. We're probably looking at about a 4.5% growth rate for the year, which, again, is very, very good. Problem is the inflation. So the current administration and the Federal Reserve both believe that the inflation is caused by supply chain disruptions. And as such, as soon as those supply chain disruptions are fixed, the inflation will essentially go away. As a result, the administration and Federal Reserve feel there really is nothing that they need to do. Just let this play out. I disagree with that strongly. And the reasons are The supply chain may be causing some of the inflation, but I don't believe it's causing much. Why do I say that? The economy in about July of 2021 had gotten back to the level of output before the pandemic. So we're producing more now than we were prior to the pandemic. The problem is we have so much excess demand, and that's what's really causing the inflation. Why do we have so much excess demand? As you mentioned, the federal government has deficit spent nearly $6 trillion in the last 2 years. On a $22 trillion economy, that's going to lead to pure inflation. And not only does the administration want to reduce government spending to eliminate or at least minimize inflation, they want to do just the opposite. They want to spend even more money on President Biden's Build Back Better America plan. If that gets passed this year, and I don't think it will, but if it does get passed, that will add even more to the inflation problem. Secondly, the Federal Reserve, and in my view, the Federal Reserve has been shockingly irresponsible in their behavior. So why do I say that? Historically, since really 1981, when economists and politicians realized that if we control the rate of growth in the money supply, we can control inflation. So from 1981, when I started this, up till last year, they did that, and we had very mild inflation for the last 40 years. This year, however, the inflation started to flare up, and they didn't do anything about it, and it wasn't really until November where they started to do something. Why should, in my view, they should have started back in March. Now, why do I say that? Well, the consumer price index for the last 2, 3, 4 years goes up about 0.1% a month, maybe 0.2% a month. So if you multiply that by 12, that's about a 2% annual inflation rate.
Right.
So what happened going into 2021? The CPI went up 0.3% in January, 0.4% in February, 0.6% in March. Once that happened in March, the Federal Reserve should have cut back on their bond buying program. And up until this past November, they were buying $120 billion a month of government bonds. But they didn't start to curtail that, as I said, until November. Secondly, the Federal Reserve has kept interest rates near zero, and they continue to do that today. That's causing inflation in some specific markets that are very interest rate sensitive, like new homes and cars. And the excess demand that the Federal Reserve's policy has created has led to the inflation in those two markets.
Professor, let me ask you this. Even something as simple as gas prices aren't expected to go down. According to Gas Buddy, they just released this. Gas prices aren't expected to drop below $3 a gallon until 2023. That doesn't look good for folks on a fixed income, right? I mean, gas that hurts small business. That hurts folks just trying to get by, right?
Yeah, you'll see gasoline prices up in the $4 range before this year is over. And you read that it'll go down in 2023. I don't know what's going to happen to bring it down. They've restricted the supply of gasoline and fossil fuels in the U.S., which at one time, a couple of years ago, was the largest producer of fossil fuels. So I'm not sure it's going to come down even by 2023. And you're right. High gas prices hit lower income earners the hardest. They drive to go to work or drive to what they have to do. They have lower incomes, and as a result of that, a price increase on gasoline and other products may be very difficult for them to bear.
We're talking with economist Dr. Michael Bussler. Another disturbing trend, Professor, is in the labor market. And this obviously facing us in 2022, the labor market, the labor force participation rate remains relatively low. I mean, it's decent at 61.6%, but that's well below pre-COVID levels, which was around 63%. I know there are restaurants here in town. There's always help wanted signs everywhere.
Yeah. Absolutely. So a lot of those workers, as you say, aren't going back to work. The labor force participation rate is down significantly. In fact, we're producing more now than before the pandemic. There's about 3.5 million fewer workers that has dropped out of the labor market. Had they come back into the market, economic growth would have been much stronger. And again, we had a great year last year, but it would have been even stronger, and growth would be even higher this year if those people would come back into the labor market and start working again.
Well, and Professor, here's the other big unknown. What if COVID doesn't go away? The pandemic remains the single largest potential disruptor of domestic and, frankly, for that matter, global the economy. We're already seeing talk about vaccine mandates for domestic flights. Now there's talk about shutting down the cruise line industry again. What happens if we go back down to lockdowns? If we go to that rabbit hole again, that could be devastating to the economy.
It would, and my whole economic forecast gets thrown off there as a result of that. So the numbers that I gave you would not be right. So it's how we react to this COVID virus that will depend on economic growth going forward. If the virus gets more severe, and the number of cases is way up, the number of deaths is not up. It's still just over 1,000 per day, not to make light of that. That's certainly a lot of people. But the number of cases have gone up, and it looks like at least this last Omicron variant is not as severe as some of the other ones. People are not going to the hospital as much, and they don't result in a fatal outcome. But if the virus flares up again and we have to shut down, that's going to throw the whole economic forecast off, and we may get plunged back into a recession. We had a very mild recession, not mild, but a deep but short-lived recession in 2021, and it was due to the virus. So if the virus flares up, everything's going to change.
Well, I'll take that 4%. Let's hope it turns out that you're right. I've seen some predictions as low as 2%, some as high as 5 to 7. I doubt it.
Yeah.
I get it's that high, but Dr. Busler, thank you again for joining us this evening. If folks want to connect with you, they can find you on Twitter at mbusler on Twitter, correct?
Correct. That's at MBUSLER. And if you have a Facebook page, search for Funding Democracy. Funding Democracy. All of my columns are posted there, and I'd be very happy if anybody followed me.
Well, I follow you on Twitter. I appreciate you. Thank you again for joining us this evening, Professor. Carry on the fight, my friend.
I'll do the best I can. Thank you for having me.
We'll be taking your calls at 7:45. In the meantime, coming up after the break, we'll preview the 2022 legislative session with House Majority Leader Dan Hawkins. You're listening to The John Whitmer Show on 98.7 and 1330 KNSS, Wichita's #1 talk.
New to CuriosityStream. Explore the world of caves miles underground
Yours is the first light ever to illuminate this cavern.
with wonders never before seen.
Amazing.
Watch the Curiosity original Underworld. And did you know body temperature changes based on your emotions? See how our feelings impact us in ways we never imagined in the science of emotions. Watch now on CuriosityStream. Annual plans are just $20. That's $1.67 a month. Visit CuriosityStream.com.
In 1987, a former prosecutor named Margaret Kuhn took her dog for a walk in one of Louisiana's safest and most affluent parishes. The next morning, she was found dead on the side of the road. 34 years later, the crime remains unsolved.
No one is safe.
Binge the entire season of Gone South, Who Killed Margaret Kuhn? The hit documentary podcast from C13 Originals, available for free on the Odyssey app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
The new musical political comedy troupe DC's Reflecting Fools have received the peaceful transfer of comedy from the closed-down Capitol Steps. Former Steps members build back buffoonery in new shows at the North Shore Center in Skokie. Join the latest political movement in comedy with DC's Reflecting Fools and musical parodies reflecting the headlines. January 28th through the 30th at the North Shore Center in Skokie. Tickets at northshorecenter.org.